In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you are new, I am Becca, a former intelligence analyst turned newbie investigator who does research into cold cases for a hobby, and I am here to share that research with you. But today, I have two recent news stories that I wanted to share. Now, both have been unfolding within the last month or so and really have me feeling sick to my stomach. The common theme among these two cases, and really among most of the stories I share here, is the utter lack of respect and the incredible hatred men have for women. And if you want to stay for my rant on this topic, I will put it at the end, but let's get into these two stories first. On Tuesday, November 11th, around 6 a.m., Wright County, Minnesota deputies responded to a 911 call reporting that a woman had suffered major head trauma and was experiencing significant blood loss at Advanced Process Technologies, which was a food and dairy processing facility in Cocado, Minnesota. Officers and medical crews got to the scene and attempted life-saving measures, but the woman was pronounced dead at the scene. She died from blunt force trauma to the head. The victim was 20-year-old Amber Czech, an employee at the facility. Now, police did not have to look far to figure out what had happened here. The entire incident was captured on surveillance. Amber had been murdered by a coworker who quickly confessed. The offender, 40-year-old David DeLong, bludgeoned her to death with a sledgehammer. Wright County Attorney Brian Lutz said surveillance video shows the two walking past each other prior to the murder. He said, quote, "They actually pass by each other, but it doesn't even appear that they address or engage each other at all." DeLong, though, reportedly then put on work gloves at his workstation, picked up a sledgehammer, and walked back to where Czech was working. Lutz said that while Czech is just out of view of surveillance footage, the video clearly shows DeLong swinging the sledgehammer at her at least 5 times. Lutz said, quote, "The first swing is horizontal, and I took that to mean she's standing upright at that time. He then makes 4 more swings, and they're very aggressive, violent, and forceful swings." After the attack, DeLong went up to another guy who must also work there and said something along the lines of, "I hit her with your hammer. She is by your toolbox. She's gone." This guy then went over to see what happened, and that's when cops were called. Now, DeLong didn't deny the attack at all, and he admitted to authorities that he intended to kill her and that he had been planning to kill her for some time. Why was he planning to kill her? He didn't like her. Lutz said, quote, "He mentioned in his statement that she had kind of given him a bad look, and he was upset about that. Apparently, the bad look was some time ago, and he just didn't like her. It's an illogical type behavior." DeLong has been charged with second-degree murder and is being held on a $2 million bail and is set to appear in court on November 24th, so that will have already happened by the time this episode comes out. A grand jury may be convened to upgrade the charges against DeLong to first-degree premeditated murder, which I think definitely sounds more appropriate. Amber's family said she was fantastic at her job and loved going to work each day. The community has been devastated by this loss, and hundreds have contributed to raising money for a memorial fund. I will link to a GoFundMe in the show notes if you're interested in donating. This story is just so devastating to me because Amber did nothing wrong. I mean, DeLong said that she apparently gave him a look. This could have been anything. I mean, I think of myself. I always have a look on my face. And even if she did give him a look, what possesses someone to think that this is a logical next step, that anyone deserves this? What I am interested in learning from this case, and this is like a really quick story that we're going to have, there's obviously not a lot of information out on it right now, is what types of warning signs there probably were. I think of like workplace shootings and, school shootings, other shootings. There generally are big warning signs. And I wonder, especially because he said he had been planning this for a long time, I wonder if he had told anybody about this, if anyone that was close to him thought something was off or something was strange. I saw one report that said that people in his family had cut contact with him, but I don't know if that's true. That was like one report, and I only saw that mentioned one other place. But I would imagine someone who does something so serious and so drastic has to have this immense hatred towards women. And I would imagine that they've been violent towards people in the past. I'm very curious to see what comes of the trial, if this goes to trial. I hope that these charges get increased to first-degree premeditated murder. It's just insane. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this here in just a little bit, but I want to move on to our second story because while it doesn't deal with murder, it has a similar theme, in my opinion. Now, a woman named as Jane Doe in the civil suit we'll get into is a military spouse living in Texas. Now, throughout 2025, she began experiencing some health issues. She was experiencing pelvic pain and hormone irregularities, so she scheduled an appointment with her OB-GYN, a man named Blaine McGraw. McGraw is an Army obstetrician working at Fort Hood in Texas. Now, Jane had a series of appointments, about 7 or 8, trying to get to the bottom of the pain and issues she was experiencing. I don't have a description of each appointment that wasn't provided in the civil suit, but over time, it seems like Jane started getting more and more uncomfortable with what was going on at these appointments. There were routine vaginal and pelvic exams, definitely, but McGraw repeatedly failed to offer to summon a chaperone. And for those who aren't familiar, during these sorts of exams, like a vaginal exam, a pelvic exam, you have the option, and I think this is actually really with any procedure, you have the option to request that another individual be present during the examination. And Jane said that throughout her appointments, though, she could only recall one time where another person was present. Now, she also started to feel uncomfortable because McGraw would sometimes suggest extra exams, like a breast exam, despite her saying she wasn't experiencing any breast-related concerns. And he also began making comments to her that were wholly inappropriate and unrelated to the appointment. On one instance, McGraw said, quote, "Your surgeon did a great job. Your breasts look great." And I mean, there's literally no reason a doctor should be commenting on your physical appearance in that way. But it goes even further. During one appointment, Jane underwent a procedure that is performed under sedation. And when she returned for a follow-up appointment, McGraw made a comment about having seen all of her tattoos. And it's not like she had tattoos down near her hips. Her tattoos are all primarily on her upper body in areas that wouldn't have been visible during the procedure she was there for. To her, this was also confusing, and it made her uneasy. How would he have seen these tattoos, and why would he be making a comment like this? But beyond the inappropriate comments, Jane said McGraw began calling her after hours. And it wasn't to talk about her appointments or lab results or anything like that. She felt like he was trying to form some sort of personal relationship with her, and she said she never invited the calls either. And then, on October 14th, 2025, Jane returned for a routine pelvic exam. And while she was in the exam room, McGraw received a phone call. He answered the phone, and Jane said he was talking about something medical, like he was coordinating an appointment or something. And when he was done, he put the phone in his breast pocket. McGraw then continued with the exam, asks for her to remove her pants for the pelvic exam, and I imagine then she lies down and props her feet up. As any woman who has had an exam like this knows, it's a really uncomfortable position. You are completely exposed, your legs are spread, everything. And McGraw does the exam. But then, 3 days later, on October 17th, Jane receives a call. The caller is an agent with the Army Criminal Investigation Division, or CID, and they ask her to come in for an interview. The agents inform her that her doctor, Blaine McGraw, had been secretly filming multiple female patients during their appointments. They show her multiple still photographs recovered from his phone, and the images are unmistakable. It's Jane's body, her body. And she can tell it was from the exam that she just had on the 14th, just a couple days prior. What had happened was when McGraw took that phone call, which they do not believe was a real phone call, they believed he faked it, when he put his phone into his breast pocket, he put it there so the camera was peeking out, and he had turned his camera on and was recording the entire time. The CID agents told her that he had multiple photos and videos of her and other female patients. She asked if she could see the video of her in its entirety, but they wouldn't allow it. They also weren't able to confirm to her if McGraw had sent the photos or videos to anyone else, or if they had been posted online. The agents at the end of the interview gave Jane a pamphlet with the phone numbers to various Army departments. And that was that. Jane left the interview, sat in her car, and cried. Jane's story is outlined in a civil suit she filed, and the suit outlines just how deep and disturbing this case goes. Because McGraw's behavior wasn't just isolated to Fort Hood, Texas. He had been doing this for years, and at other military installations. He had been working at the Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii, starting in 2019. And during this time, at least one female patient filed a complaint alleging that McGraw had recorded her during a pelvic exam. But the suit says that rather than investigating or removing him from his position, they dismissed the complaint and allowed him to continue working there. Now, this guy was at Tripler in Hawaii in 2019. That is the same hospital I was at when we lived in Hawaii, and we lived there until 2020. Now, I don't think that I had him as a doctor. I don't think I ever even went to Tripler during 2019, but that is wild. It makes me so uncomfortable. But the suit goes into so much more. It also provides examples of his behavior towards other patients, both inappropriate behavior and a complete disregard for the autonomy of his patients. One pregnant patient, the civil suit alleges, clearly stated she didn't want to be induced, and there was no medical reason for her to be induced, but McGraw did it anyway, despite her wishes to not be. Other patients relayed inappropriate comments he had said to them, including him telling one patient during a vaginal exam that, quote, her vagina looks pretty, especially considering her recent delivery. During that same exam, he touched her sexually in a way that clearly was not medically necessary and made sexually suggestive comments, like referring to her clitoris as her happy spot. In addition to the complaint from the patient in Hawaii that said he was recording her, the civil suit says the Army knew about his behavior as there were many more complaints about his conduct. Multiple patients had come forward before Jane's experience and complained about unchaperoned exams, inappropriate comments, unnecessary touching, and after-hours calls and text messages. One of the patients filed a formal written complaint and was told that McGraw would, quote, be spoken to. But he remained practicing medicine, unsupervised, for years. Now, in the civil suit, there is a section that says when the whistleblowing husband who exposed defendant McGraw's filming sought to meet with Army leadership, he was refused meetings at every level. He was told to, quote, send an email. The Army's posture was one of indifference and avoidance, not urgency or accountability. Even after CID confirmed McGraw's confession, the hospital waited weeks before authorizing victim notification. This was the first mention of a whistleblower that I saw, and I don't know if this was the Jane Doe's husband, who maybe after she was contacted by CID tried to meet with Army leadership, or if he then went to the media with the story. That part is unclear to me. But since the attorney representing Jane Doe in this case says he represents at least 50 other women who have come forward with similar allegations. There were thousands of photos and videos on McGraw's phone, and the Army has sent out at least 1,400 letters to patients of McGraw's. An NBC article published on November 13th says 85 patients have responded, but many of the individuals in the photos remain unidentified. If you were a patient of Blaine McGraw's, I will find and put contact information in the description of this episode if you want to come forward. I want to, though, take a step back and talk about Fort Hood. If you are not a military member, but are familiar with the base, Fort Hood, it's probably because of news of the horrific treatment of women there and the number of people who have died. One name you probably have heard of is Vanessa Guillen, who on April 22nd, 2020, was murdered, dismembered, and her remains burned. She served at Fort Hood and was murdered by another soldier, Aaron Robinson, with the help of his girlfriend. Before her murder, Vanessa told friends and family she was being sexually harassed by a superior, but she didn't report it because she feared retaliation. Now, there is so much more to this story, and I think I will cover this one specifically in depth in another episode, but in December of 2020, it was announced that 14 commanders and other leaders had been, quote, disciplined, and that an investigation found there was a, quote, permissive environment for sexual assault and sexual harassment at Fort Hood. But now with this story about Blaine McGraw, we see how widespread the, quote, permissive environment actually is. Multiple women came forward and filed complaints about McGraw, but he continued to assault patients, and this was not just at Fort Hood. The complaints were not taken seriously, and the military just moved him to another post where the abuse continued. There are so many stories like this in many different fields. Reports of police officers raping inmates and just being moved to another jurisdiction. Reports of priests molesting children and the church covering it up and just moving them to another parish. Men in positions of power abusing women and children, and more people in power, and the system as a whole covering it up, protecting the abuser and allowing the abuse to continue and enabling it. And now let's talk about both of these stories as a whole. I have talked about this before. I've had guests come onto my podcast to talk about their experiences as domestic violence survivors. I've had researchers come talk about domestic violence homicide. Prosecutors talk about low conviction rates for rapes and sexual assaults. And again, I want to caveat, I don't want to diminish the fact that men can also be abused. We had a male survivor of domestic violence come and talk about his experience, and that is something I think isn't talked about a lot. But I really don't understand when it comes to violence against women, why there isn't more of a national movement and effort where men come together and change the culture that exists that makes men violent. What is it? We have had huge movements to bring attention to workplace harassment of women with the Me Too movement. We've had women's marches. We just saw in the last month or so, survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation come together to force powerful people to stop covering up for the other men who took advantage of them. But I want to see men doing more. We need to shift the onus to be on them. There is so much talk on how women can protect ourselves and what red flags we need to look out for. And yes, that is important, but I want to see more men having these conversations. And while we've had all of these movements, I worry that things are not getting better. The President of the United States in the last month called a female reporter piggy, which is just adding to the list of ways he's treated women horrifically. We have an increase in right-wing, Christian influencers and podcasters outright calling for women's right to vote to be repealed. From a legislative perspective, women are being denied health care and dying from miscarriages. Maybe the bad overshadows the good, but I just can't help but feel like we are really moving backwards. I want to know what you think about this. Give me some hope. Give me some good stories, your thoughts, opinions, whatever you want. Send me a message on social media. You can send me an email. Thank you all so much for being here. When this episode is released, it will be right before the holidays. So I hope you all have a happy holiday time and get to spend some time with family and friends. Again, I'm going to put some information in the description of this episode if you're interested in donating to Amber Czech's Memorial Fund, or if you have any information on the abuse by Blaine McGraw. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break, but I will be rerunning an episode next week and the week after. Next week, we will revisit the disappearance of Dawn Allen, a case that has really stuck with me and really started my entire journey into researching cold cases in depth. And then the week after that, we will replay the murder of Dorothy Miller in preparation for a few episodes on two men I think could be top contenders for the person who murdered her. Stay tuned for that. And once again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.